ladies and gentlemen. I think we're up to 9:30, so if we can make a start when you're ready, please. Before we start the formal meeting, could I just take a moment to pay tribute to my predecessor in this chair, Councillor Richard Redcliffe, who's today on the back benches. Richard, I think, has been an excellent chairman. I hope everybody will agree. He's guided this committee with wisdom and insight, and a firm hand where necessary, always in the right way. And I can only hope to sort of carry on in the same vein. So, big thank you to Richard. Let's thank you in the traditional way. Thank you for that. And also, forgetting my manners, thank you to Councillor Martin Evans for stepping up to the Vice Chairman's role, and I look forward to his support where necessary and the odd kick under the table, no doubt. So thank you for taking over. Thank you very much. Right, without further ado, on to the agenda of this morning's meeting, Planning Committee of Wednesday the 20th of May 2026. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Farrington?
I'm not sure really if it falls within it, but just in case. The item 3 I notice is about the ice rink system Square. I'm not sure who has put this forward, but I'm associate member of the Live and Business Group by virtue of the fact I'm a councillor.
Can I hold you for a second? The item 3 is the Land South West Road Singleton.
Oh, sorry, where's the ice rink?
I don't.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong bloody agenda.
No.
Excuse my language.
Can we raise that one from the record?
We're approaching Christmas, a little early there.
Hold on. Yeah.
While we're sorting that out, are there any other declarations of interest?
Sorry, I'm just going to open it again.
In which case, let's move on to confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting of 29th of April to be previously circulated. I'm happy to propose those as necessary. Those from the minutes of the previous meeting, can we have a quick vote to accept? Thank you very much. Substitute members.
Yes, we've got Councillor Frank Andrews here on behalf of Councillor Billy Saffron.
Councillor Andrews. Thank you. In that case, without further ado, let's move on to the planning matters. The first item is land at the junction of School Road and Brambles Lane, west of the Plumptons. I'll hand over to John Coates, who's the officer of the presentation. I think we had late observations on this one, which I'm sure you've read. I'm sure John will cover in detail in the presentation.
Yes, good morning. Yes, we will cover the late observations in this presentation when talking about highways matters, and so we will go over those in full. But yes, this is planning application 19/0284, land to the south of School Road. It's an application for 60 houses. You'll notice that this is an application that originally came in quite a while ago, in 2019. I'll talk a bit about that as we're going through. So yeah, it's a planning application for 60 houses comprising 53 3-bed and 7 4-bed. The scheme will also include a local area for play, open space for floodwater attenuation, but also for landscaping and recreation, a foul water pumping station, and other associated developments, so the usual kind of thing, boundaries, parking areas, roads, access. So the application has been in for quite some time, and significant amendments have been made to the proposals. These are primarily as a result of changes to the flood risk designation of the site, but also in response to other matters that have come up over the kind of 6 or 7 years this application has been in. Those are partly just as a result of the fact that when an application is in for such a length of time, the context can change in terms of policy, in terms of understanding certain technical matters, and also in terms of the kind of intent of the developer as well. So I'll talk about each of those things as we go through the application. In terms of background, this application is part of a wider allocated site. So it's a wider site, the Whitehill site, that's allocated in the local plan. You may recall some of the other applications that have come in as part of that wider allocation. So the main site, just being the largest one, was a Wayne home site for 350 dwellings, and that last came to committee in April 2024, and a resolution to grant permission for that was made by planning committee. That application is actually still live, so all actions relating to that application are with the applicant. We are expecting them to come back with an amended scheme at some point soon to help bring that forward. Two other applications, however, have recently been granted permission. One of those is the former Garden Place site, and that is actually in the process of being developed at the moment, and that's for housing and a local centre. And housing for that one was entirely affordable, and the local centre includes a few units for retail, potentially other schools. Yes, it's a spa that's going in there. And then the other side, the smallest of the allocation, was the Proper Lodge site, which came to committee more recently. That was February this year, and that's also been approved. So this application is one part of that wider allocated site. The wider allocation was made through the local plan with one of the key objectives being delivering the local centre as part of the Garden Place application, and that was to provide a shop and some other facilities in the White Hills area. And that in turn, the kind of motivation for that grew out of the fact that over on the other side of the Proper Road, there was the new housing that came forward. There was part of the scheme that we refused, but there was one on appeal as part of a 5-year housing land supply argument. So the local plan recognised that housing had come forward in that area, but there weren't necessarily kind of shops and other services in the local area. So this wider allocation was being delivered to deliver a critical mass of housing in the area to support the neighbourhood centre. So in that way, kind of all of these sites are interconnected. That point about 5-year housing land supply is irrelevant once again. So as a reminder to members, we are currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. We are in the process of updating the local plan and allocating new sites which should address that issue. The reason I remind you of that is that it's explained in the officer report that it's an important part of the consideration for this proposal, the fact that this is a site that is allocated for housing. Delivery will potentially assist with reducing the likelihood of other sites coming forward that aren't allocated, that might be put forward on an argument based on the fact that we do not have a 5-year housing land supply. So basically, the more housing we can deliver, the less likely it is that we have to or are more pressure to approve sites for housing on sites which aren't allocated. If you have any questions about that, at the end we can obviously go through that in a bit more detail. So this plan just shows the wider allocation. So to the left, where you've got the black outlines with the application numbers, this is the current White Hills wider application, 190284. That's this application, School Road site. Wayne Homes 1, 22041, which is in 2 parts, and and then the Garden Place and Cropper Lodge in between. The Garden Place is shown as an appeal site, was at the time it's pulled together, it was an appeal site, but those have been approved. The kind of orangey brown blob towards the centre, that's the housing that came forward as part of the 5-year housing land supply previously, before the current local plan was made. And then there's some other housing separately coming forward in the wider area, and other sites that have been put forward for the current local plan nearby as well. So there has previously been housing that's come forward in the area. There are current allocations and potentially future allocations as well. So this is just an overview of the layout plan, and just so you've got a clear idea of the site that we're talking about. So you can see relative to the overall allocation, it's a smaller site, and you'll note that quite a large amount of the site is shown as kind of open green space. That primarily relates to this issue around floodwater management, which I'll talk a bit more about later in the presentation. So when considering this proposal, beyond some of the kind of broader context that I've talked about, the main policy in our local plan, the most pertinent policy, is policy M1, which is the policy for master planning for the allocated sites and sites such as this. And the key things that policy talks about are taking a comprehensive approach, considering flood risk, high quality design, areas and access, ecology and biodiversity net gain, contributions and viability. The policy does talk about other principles as well for development and delivering allocated sites, but these are the ones that are most pertinent to this proposal. The officer report goes through all the relevant policies in more detail. So in terms of a comprehensive approach, the policy says that strategic locations for development should be considered as a whole. So this is particularly relevant for this proposal because this application is one small part of the wider allocation. So one thing that we've worked on with the applicant and with our consultees is ensuring that this development would come forward in a way that works with the wider allocation, so that it's not going to cause incompatibility or problems or reduces the likelihood of that happening. Now, obviously, that can be challenging when different parcels of an allocation are in different ownership. And given the length of time that this application has been in, that has been one area of particular challenge, because it can become quite difficult to manage and predict how things are going to pan out. But the applicants have worked with us and with the agents for some of the other sites as well to kind of minimise issues around that point. One of the key things that's come out of that is the production of an indicative master plan that which I can show on screen. You may recall seeing this as part of the Wayne Homes application, although it was back in April 2024 that you may have last been shown this, so I'm not kind of asking to go back over 2 years there. But this indicative master plan was prepared by that applicant for the Wayne Homes site, but covers the wider allocated site, and the applicants for each of the different sites reviewed this and signed up to the general principle of it. So this has been a guiding principle for us as officers in terms of when we've been having to think about compatibility between the sites. It's indicative, so you'll notice that the kind of patterns of development shown for this application here and the other applications isn't exactly as it is. The purpose of an indicative master plan like this is just to show general principles as to how the development could come forward, how the sites can work together. And some of the things that have been pulled through, for example, are the provision of the option for connection points across the boundaries between sites, for pedestrian and cycle links, and kind of general highways layouts as well. So we are comfortable that this proposal that's before you today kind of meets, is in accordance with the principles of the indicative master plan, and it's been brought forward in a way that is provides the option for compatibility and linkages with those adjacent sites as well. So one of the things that we've kind of talked about quite a bit there relates to highways and access, and we have a late observation report which provides a bit of an update about highways as well. So just as a bit of background, one of the most challenging aspects of bringing this site forward has been relating to the fact that it is just one part of the wider allocated site, that the Wainhomes site, which is the majority of the site, hasn't yet come forward. So this site needs to be brought forward in a way that allows the housing to come forward and be delivered, but also connects up into the local area in a way that is safe and convenient and appropriate. Now, you may be aware that School Road between this site and the White Hills roundabout doesn't have a pavement, is in places quite narrow, and on one side is alongside a ditch as well. There is a grass verge, but there's a ditch, and the condition of the road at the moment isn't the best, although that's that word. This site has had an issue of how to connect to the local area in a way that is safe and convenient. There's been extensive negotiation and discussions between the applicants, highways consultants, and Lancashire County Council highways team that we have been part of as well. There have been lots of different options that have been explored in terms of how this development could be brought forward and connect to the wider area with pedestrian links and cycle links in a way that's safe and appropriate. There have been different scenarios considered, for example, providing a pedestrian route along Bambus Lane back through and up and round. The main issue with that is that to get to, for example, the neighbourhood centre that's being developed, it's a very long way for pedestrians to walk, and our highways team are of the opinion that instead pedestrians would just walk down School Road along the verge if there wasn't a pavement. So we obviously had concerns about pedestrian safety in that regard. There were also options explored in terms of installing a new footway along School Road. There are a number of challenges to delivering that. One is a simple one around kind of proportionality and viability. So for this development to deliver the highways improvements that would be required to widen the roads, to build a footway where there are quite significant levels changes into a ditch, it would require quite a lot of engineering. Also challenges around land ownership. It's just not practically within the scope of this application at this time to do that. So that wasn't a solution that could be relied upon. The ideal solution that's envisaged by the indicative master plan is that this site would provide a footway along part of School Road that would then connect into the Wainhomes site with foot and cycle routes and through the Wainhomes site to the neighbourhood centre. But obviously that application is further behind in the timeline, and we can't be certain, although we're confident that's going to come forward, we can't be certain that it will, and we don't know exactly when it will. So that means we were kind of left in a difficult situation where there wasn't an obvious kind of fully formulated solution that could be delivered. So through that negotiation with the county council and with the applicant, the position we've arrived at is that the recommendation includes a condition to be attached to the proposal, which is a bespoke condition based upon one of our kind of standard highways conditions, but tailored to fit this scenario. And what it does is it sets a trigger of not allowing any above ground works on the site to take place until a fully detailed and finalised strategy has been provided to us and approved, and in consultation with the local highway authority. works could progress. So the reason why it's a no above ground works condition is that the applicants understandably would like to be able to make some progress with getting works underway, with lining up kind of contractors and various bits of work that they have to do. So this condition provides them some comfort, if this was to be approved, that there is a positive way forward. But it also provides the reassurance and security to us and to the highway authority that we wouldn't end up in a situation where, for example, houses had been built ready for occupation and there was a condition restricting occupation until those had been sold, because then that would put more pressure on the council and on the highway authority. You know, if you can imagine a scenario where all the houses are built, we haven't quite managed to sort this out, it would be difficult to manage that situation, and it wouldn't be appropriate in terms of looking at how the condition works against the tests that we have to have reference to when we create the condition. So this is seen as a solution, a pragmatic solution that is acceptable to the highway authority, that is acceptable from the perspective of the officers, and that the applicant has indicated that they are happy to agree to this condition and can work on this basis. So it's pragmatic in terms of overcoming the, not fully overcoming, but allowing some progress to be made against these high-risk issues, but also increasing the likelihood that this site, which is allocated for housing, can come forward. And you'll appreciate that after the application has been in for such a long period of time, it's important for the developer to be able to make some progress. So that's how we've ended up at that scenario. Of course, with regards to other high-risk considerations, such as access, tracking within the site, parking, turning circles, all of those kinds of features, those have been reviewed. Lots of amendments have been made to the scheme to the satisfaction of the highway authority, and in those regards, considered to be acceptable. Similarly, in terms of highways capacity and impacts on the local highway network, again, those impacts are considered to be acceptable. So there's been an awful lot of work that's gone in, particularly around highways, to get to this point, and this is seen as an appropriate way forward. In terms of access more generally as well, the proposal includes pedestrian links around the site, including through some of the open green spaces, and provision of connection points across the boundary for pedestrian and cycle links to connect up to the Wayne Homes site. So again, referring back to that indicative master plan, those connection points would be provided so that Wayne Homes could then also connect up to them. And Wayne Homes have reviewed those connection points and agreed that that's what they can work with as well. So there were just a couple of excerpts from some of the plans just to kind of illustrate what I've been talking about. The site access tracking has been reviewed, as well as tracking within the site. I didn't mention parking earlier actually. The scheme, the proposals are compliant with our parking standards. There aren't garages within the proposals, but there are 2 parking spaces for each dwelling. What this shows is that the vast majority of them are in curtilage. There are a couple of plots that would have parking spaces nearby to the house, just within not within the highway exactly, but adjacent to it. But most of them are within curtilage. So the other kind of headline challenge and issue for this site relates to flood risk. So again, if you recall the other applications for the wider allocated site, flood risk was particularly kind of challenging, but the situation with this application is the same as for the other applications. So just by way of background, just to remind you, the flood zone classification for this site and the wider allocated site was changed late into the local plan adoption process for the current local plan. Now, the inspector was made aware of those changes and considered that the site was still suitable for adoption within the local plan. However, However, that didn't mean that these sites didn't still need to overcome those flood risk challenges. So the proposals include significant amounts of land for floodwater management. So that's those kind of open spaces, and that's the same for the other sites as well. One of the main impacts that this has had is that it's reduced the net developable area of the site down significantly. For this site, it's about half of the site. I think it's down to about 45% of the overall site. The original proposal that came in for the site was for, I think, 160, 170 houses, something. I might have the number slightly wrong there, but it was significantly more homes. And I think that it's a reduction of, again, more than 50%. You'll appreciate that that has quite significant impacts for the developer in terms of their understanding initially of what they would be able to achieve on the site, and then what's come out of that. So that has had some knock-on impacts on the proposed development. However, I'll talk a bit more about the design and layout of the site, but overall, the proposals are still considered to be suitable. The open space also provides kind of some opportunities in terms of landscaping and recreation, and that's because whilst the land does have a function of floodwater management, those areas would be infrequently and rarely flooded. So they are suitable for planting and for recreational routes. So the number of times that those spaces would hold water or significant amounts of water is very infrequent indeed. So it's just there as a requirement to manage those situations as and when they arise. However, they will not arise that often. So the Environment Agency have been actively involved with this application and others, and alongside United Utilities, they have reviewed the proposals and are comfortable with what is being proposed. There are amendments that have been made to the scheme throughout the lifetime of the application in response to comments from the Environment Agency, but we've reached the point at which they support the proposals. There was previously an objection to this and all of the wider allocated sites, but it has been withdrawn by the Environment Agency, but they are in support. So really this development offers the opportunity to manage the flood risk on the site. I know that there is often concern from residents that where there is flood risk on site, the building housing on them can exacerbate those issues. And indeed, a lot of the comments that were submitted did make a reference to flood risk and flood water. This is a situation where the development of the site actually provides the opportunity to manage flood risk on the site, on a site that was previously a lower flood zone classification, and we've got that hierarchy. So, in those regards, flood risk is appropriately managed, and the proposals are considered to be appropriate. So just going on to the design. So I've already kind of talked quite a bit about the amount of land that's needed for floodwater mitigation. That's had a really significant impact on the layout of the site. The layout is also influenced by the boundary ditches and the levels on site relative to the adjacent sites. So effectively, the site is constrained to the red line. So what I'm saying there is that there aren't opportunities for kind of housing development to be built across into other parts of the allocated site. So sometimes when a wider allocated site is parcelled up, it can be challenging because there might be a better way to lay out where you could lay out row of kind of houses across the boundaries. Those opportunities aren't here for this site. The sites have been effectively portioned primarily by the boundary ditches that exist, which are features that have to be retained, partly for water management, partly for ecological reasons as well. And they're an important part of the character of the landscape in that area. So it's defined with within its limits are defined within the red line boundary. That said, we have found opportunities to provide foot and cycle connection points across those boundaries, as I already mentioned. The house types are fairly standard. I'll show us an example street scene in a moment. They're considered to have an acceptable level of visual detail with porches, window details, so that they're not kind of plain boxes. They have got details. They're details that are similar to the types of details that have been included on the house types for the other adjacent sites as well. The designs are different, but the detailing and the types of materials used are the same. So it's considered to be an appropriate approach for this site. I think I mentioned kind of the open spaces, the ditches, pedestrian links through them in the houses. This is just a plan excerpt that shows those things kind of together. This is the site entrance, and the site entrance will actually be quite attractive in that it will have a decent amount of open space, a very good amount of open space, it will be planting and footpaths through them. It'll be slightly set back from the road. In other places, we might want to see development built up to the road, but because of the nature of the other development down School Road, this is an okay transition between the lower density development further down School Road and coming into the White Hills roundabout area where other housing has come forward and is coming forward. So it's quite a good transition. It makes good use of the space and the features of the site. Just some examples, street scenes and house types that the applicant has provided. So as you can see, a fairly typical approach. You can also see examples of the boundary types that are being used there. Brick piers and low brick walls with wood panelling above for where the boundaries are exposed to views, and then timber fences for internal boundaries between gardens, and then kind of knee rail wooden fencing around some of the open spaces as well. So in terms of ecology and biodiversity net gain, it's important to note that this application came in before the most recent kind of updates to the biodiversity net gain legislation. So what that means is that you might be used to the idea that development is required to deliver at least a 10% uplift in terms of biodiversity net gain. That doesn't apply to this application. It's an application that came in before then and has been live since that time. That's not a discretionary position we can take. That's how that is to be interpreted. However, we do have a policy requirement for enhancement, and the NPPF still has a requirement for an uplift. This application is actually going to deliver quite significant biodiversity net gain enhancements by simple virtue of the fact that it has to have so much open space for the floodwater mitigation, and that landscaping and planting is being included within those spaces, and the ditches around the site are being maintained and kind of respected as part of the development as well. So whilst there isn't a strict requirement, this development does meet the NPPF policy test for an uplift, and actually it will deliver quite significant enhancements. Again, these proposals have been reviewed by Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, Environment Agency, Natural England, those being the most pertinent consultees, and they are subject to conditions supportive of the proposals. There is the potential for impacts on protected species and other species as well, so notably waterfoals, potentially newts, potentially otters, some bird life, owls in the area. Those surveys have been carried out. Because the application was in for such a long amount of time, those surveys have been updated to make sure that they're still current and still relevant. And again, Greater Manchester Ecology Unit has reviewed those updates and is comfortable and happy to support the proposals on that basis. Again, a lot of the comments made by neighbours did pick up on these and picked up on wildlife on the site. Obviously, with any development, there will be some impacts, but this development on this site, by virtue of the large amount of open space that's being retained, the ditches being maintained, and conditions that would control how development comes forward on this site, to protect those things, again, it's considered acceptable in that regard. again, well, we've just seen this up here. It's just a landscape and plan excerpt. It's just very similar to the one before. So just indicating the opportunity within the mitigation areas for planting. Okay, so one of the other main issues relates to contributions and viability. So in terms of policy requirements and consultation responses we've had, development of this type would be expected to deliver 30% affordable housing. Highways have said that £140,000 financial contribution to public transport. So the master plan policy in our local plan for allocated sites talks about contributions for public transport as well. You may recall that the Wayne Holmes site was, when it was last brought to committee, included a contribution towards creation of bus stops and a bus route through the site. So there is an objective of delivering public transport links to White Hills once critical mass housing is there to support those. £6,000 for travel plan monitoring, that's kind of standard for housing development. Just under £180,000 for off-site footpath improvements and connection improvements, and a likely contribution of around about £50,000 towards health. The Educational Authority provided a consultation response that they require no contribution for primary or secondary places, given that there is existing capacity in local schools. However, this proposal has been put forward with a viability position being argued that this scheme would not be able to make any contributions. Now, obviously, that's quite a significant impact to consider. I've talked about the lifetime of this application and the reduction in the net developable area, and some of the other challenges that kind of have faced this site. At a high level, that's the reason why this development has been put forward, with the viability argues that no contributions can be made. We of course don't just kind of accept that position. What we do is we take their viability report. The applicant then pays for us to have our own appointed third-party viability consultants to review that. They have reviewed that and come back with their own assessment against the applicant's position. Now, the final result is that they agree that the scheme is not viable with contributions, and even without contributions makes a return for the developer that is below what is usually allowed as kind of an acceptable return for the developer. But just to explain a bit further how that's tested, our viability consultant runs through all the numbers, facts, the figures, and does their own assessment. And this is summarised in the officer report as well. But what this is a list of all the points of effectively kind of disagreement between our viability consultant and theirs. This is normal. This is always the case when these assessments, or nearly always the case when these assessments are carried out. And our viability consultant argued that some of their figures they would adjust slightly and adjust towards making the development more profitable. Even with those adjustments, the final conclusion is that the scheme is still not viable with contributions being made, and that the return to the developer will be less than that is typically accepted and agreed upon as a return when considering these things. So, despite this, the applicant still wants to bring this site forward. There is a return to be made, but that's lower than what we typically see. It is worth noting that the applicant has offered a £50,000 contribution towards resolving the highways connection points. The reason that that's been made is that the highways position was that this issue will need to be resolved, and that whichever scenario this development ends up coming forward under, there will be works needed to School Road in terms of improvements to School Road. So that contribution has grown out of those negotiations between the applicant and the local highway authority. But that is a separate amount that's being offered outside of the scope of the viability appraisal. But they have confirmed that, and it's reflected in the recommendation, they have confirmed agreement to this, and that the recommendation would include the creation of a Section 106, a legal agreement to secure that money, that would then be used towards getting the site connected up to the wider area in a way that's agreeable to the highway authority. So the recommendation is that the decision on the application is delegated to the head of planning to be made in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the planning committee, with reference to 3 elements to be satisfied, not 4, as I said on the slide there, apologies. So stipulation 1, the adoption of the shadow habit regulations assessment. So I didn't mention this earlier, sorry, under ecology, but the shadow HRA, this is an assessment that's required because the development on the site has the potential to have impacts on a number of protected areas. I think in this case it's the Ribble Estuary and a couple of other areas. That's done in consultation with Environment Agency, Natural England, GMEU. It's standard for this type of development. The other developments on the wider allocation have had to do the same thing. It has recommendations in it, including the production of leaflets for future homeowners, occupiers on the site, to just make them aware of the context. So that's fairly standard. As I just mentioned, completion of a Section 106 agreement just for the £50,000 for the matters relating to highways, no other contributions, and then the full drafting of the conditions, and a schedule of which is provided in the officer report. The specific wording for the bespoke highways condition is provided in the late observation report. The other conditions will be based upon our standard conditions and would be similar to the conditions of the other wider allocated sites. Okay, thank you very much.
We can move on to the questions of debate. The first hand to go up, I believe, was Councillor Goodman.
Yes, good morning. I have 3 issues, one of which has already been mentioned. I think I may have put one other 2 things. That was with regard to transport and the bus stops and things. There's nothing down there, I have to say. And I guess you've mentioned already that once the site is established, that we've got so we've got a really good link along Queensway to Blackpool. The second one is similar, education. St Nicholas Church of England is not a huge figure in that same end of School Road toward the Queensway. And then I believe there's a Catholic primary on the corner of Squiresgate Lane and the main road going through to Blackpool. You did mention something about it.
Thank you, Councillor Goodman. Yes, so just to start, with regards to the buses, I mentioned it briefly, but just by way of a bit of further info, the adjacent Wayne Homes application, which is the larger one of the allocations, includes the diversion of Cropper Road. So Cropper Road is a road that, the Highway Authority kind of considered there's a need to either upgrade it or provide a new link because of the condition of the road. So part of the allocation of the wider site kind of had the diversion of Cropper Road as part of that. That is the route upon which it's envisaged that the new kind of bus connection would be provided. So once that link road is in place, it will be possible for buses to be run along that route. The previous version of the Wayne Homes included a number of quality bus stops as part of that, and in consultation with the Highway Authority. The Highway Authority have a clear aspiration to deliver bus connections to the area, that's part of the reason why they requested contributions towards it. So obviously this is unable to provide contributions. Highways are aware of that. They are aware of that position. So that's something we discussed with them as well. So there is still an aspiration to deliver those links. The main Wayne Homes site within the previous version of the game had those bus connections. The road, the divergence across the road was wide enough and suitable enough for buses to go along it. So that's envisaged that the route would go through there. This site, because it's the roads within it, the roads don't connect to the wider site. It's not envisaged that buses would come into the site. However, the pedestrian links would provide a walking route of about 2 minutes, if not less, to where those bus stops. And in terms of education, we rely on the local education authority to let us know whether or not they require financial contributions. They have their own formula for how they do that. They look at the availability of places in schools, and they work out kind of a cost per pupil that demand that's generated. But for applications such as this, where the demand that is generated can be absorbed by then they do not have to contribution, and that's what's happening here. And they are entitled to look across boundary at schools, not in South, in this case, obviously very close to Blackpool. It may be that they have done that in their consideration as well. That's something that they are entitled to do. But they've been very clear that no contribution is required for boundary. So,
which was the very first one. Just before you started talking about the flood risk, I just happened to be rereading page 6 on the top of the late observations, which says the footpath and cycle path connections should be constructed in full and made available for use in accordance with details prior to the occupation of the first dwelling. Now, as I was physically reading that, I have a funny feeling you were talking about the pragmatic solution. So I do apologise, after a bit of clarification. And I think you may have said that no, that's not a good thing. Am I right?
So just to clarify, sorry, so effectively there would be the condition that we're proposing is for no above ground works until these details have been resolved. When those details come in, there would effectively be a further trigger that whatever's been agreed then has to be in place prior to occupation. So it's almost like a two-step process. So before any above ground works, the highways and connection issues need to be provided, and we need to approve them and say, yes, we're happy with that, carry on. And then they have to actually have them in place before the houses. So, for example, they couldn't then go and build the houses and say, oh, well, we'll build the footpath next year or something, just to make sure it's done. So that's what that's
Councillor Dixon.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. John, sorry for the right, I think my first question has been answered really. With the way Homes development not having a full plan, not moving forward, how can a plan be implemented for highways when they haven't got one? How can that all work? I just don't get how it's all, how the jigsaw can all fit together.
Yeah, thanks. So there are, as we see it, based on the information we've had and the discussions we've had with highways, there are two likely ways forward. One is that at such a time that the applicant for this site is providing those details, that the Wayne Homes site will have come forward in such a way that it's that we have more information and more certainty, and agreements can be made in terms of how they will connect and move them forward. Or if that hasn't happened, then the solution will need to be to the satisfaction of the Highway Authority, which the only other option that we see from a pragmatic perspective is that upgrades and enhancements to the school road would need to be provided to provide a pedestrian link all the way down School Road to the roundabout and round to the neighbourhood centre. We know that that second option is something that the applicant considers to likely not be workable. But those are, from our perspective, the two possible ways forward. There is, of course, a third possibility that another solution will be found. Now, I don't know what that would be because we've really put a lot of time and effort into considering all of the alternatives. But the applicant would be entitled to propose something and provide information, which we would then consult the local highway authority on, and we would review and look at. But I think it's very likely that it will be option number one. The Wayne Homes site forward will make the Wayne Homes site will make more progress, and that will enable a formal, structured way for these two to come together in a way with kind of appropriate controls and reassurances. But I can just to offer assurance that one of the main priorities and one of the main concerns we've had when dealing with this application is making sure that this issue in particular is dealt with in an appropriate way and that it isn't just pushed to one side. So that's why this condition of the proposals of no above ground works. Originally there was discussion about whether they could be allowed to go further with those works, but we think they can make a start on site but not do anything too substantial before we know that this will be resolved. Don't want to put the council in a position where support.
So what is the time frame on this then? If that developer is not going to sit on underground work being done for months, years, possibly as long as Wayne Homes, and that if they can't agree to build the whole footpath or the whole of School Road, which is a financially viable option to them, you're just stuck in pie in the sky world, aren't you, really?
Yeah, so in terms of the time frame for that, unfortunately I can't give you an exact answer because it's up to Wayne Homes. However, we have met with Wayne Homes and we have encouraged them to move forward with their application as soon as possible. Partly because that site itself, will deliver up to 350 homes. That's important for the area. It's an allocated site. Partly because it can help this site come forward in a way that's more practical, more workable. But yeah, that's what we're working toward, but we can't guarantee it. Oh yes, so what I was going to say is that this option that we're proposing here allows the possibility for those positive outcomes that we're aiming at to happen. So what we're effectively doing here is granting permission, but with a strong condition that says, really you need to wait until this is resolved to our satisfaction in consultation with the highway authority. So we're creating the possibility of this site, which is allocated for housing, to come forward. So all the details are worked out. The different solutions in terms of highways connections won't have a knock-on impact on the layout and design of the site otherwise. So the details that you've been provided with are fixed. Obviously, the caveat that people can always come back to amend things, but the highways shouldn't necessitate that. So this is about allowing the possibility of this to come forward, but with that safeguard in place.
Sorry, I've got that. How confident are we? This is Martin Martin. How confident are we that that area is going to sustain so many houses once they start? It's a must. I'm just thinking of like the Stanley Park and South Park Drive development. Put it up with sand. I know it was a long time ago, and I would imagine building builders have developed better underpinning whatever mechanisms they use. But as a council, are we confident that this area is suitable to build on?
I mean, it is something that's considered. We rely primarily, with regards to that type of thing, we rely primarily on the Environment Agency, on Natural England, United Utilities, so looking at water management and ground conditions. this application is supported by intrusive site investigations. It's actually had further scrutiny since the application first came in, due to the potential for peat deposits on site as well, which requires ground investigations and obviously has an potential impact on ground stability. So ultimately we rely on the technical information that's provided and those consultants who review that information. There isn't anything kind of to indicate to us that we can have concerns in that regard. And it's one of those things that is also in the developer's interest to kind of make sure it doesn't happen. So I appreciate that sometimes things like this do happen, but there's nothing to indicate that that would be the case on this site. And because the requirements around water management are so stringent, and the proposal includes effectively changes to levels on site to achieve what needs to be achieved, they're not just going onto site and building on top of the ground that's there at the moment. There will be quite significant works around that.
I think just before we move on, I think we just need to be slightly mindful that we're discussing the application before once we've done. We've got too much on to appreciate it does have an impact on it. Just a general.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, and the answer though is that any applicant is entitled to run a viability argument, but to do so they have to provide a viability report that's prepared by a suitably qualified consultant, and they have to pay our costs to have our own assessment carried out against that. National policy clearly allows applicants the option of doing that, and that it requires us to take into account this material consideration. I understand the idea that because someone's done it on this site, it might encourage others to do it, but ultimately the test is still the same. So it might give somebody more confidence that they might be able to run that, but actually what developers do is they look at the cost of developing their own site, and the abnormals on their site. The reason that we've talked about the wider allocation collectively is because of the changes to flood risk and the knock-on effect that's had on the net developable area. So I'd say that this is unusual in that after allocation there is a change that has been made outside of our control, outside of the applicant's control, that's had a direct impact on this more than half of the number of houses that we built. So speculating that yes, it could encourage other people to do the same, but ultimately that's kind of irrelevant because the test is independent, it's isolated. Their viability argument can't point to somebody else's viability argument and say, well, you've allowed it there, so you should allow it here. It has to be prepared on its own merits.
I just felt that they do compare because they could build roads there, they could put tattoos in it, there'd be no contribution to anything with it. And then who would actually build that? That's down the line, I'll wait that. Two more things, sorry. Who's going to maintain the ditches moving forward? Being maintained to build, but who will be responsible for maintaining them after?
Yeah, where the ditches are within the site, they will be maintained through a registered management company contributing to it, or the developer alongside that, which is the standard approach to all areas of landscaping and open space within new development. Where they are within the highway, which I don't think they are yet, and they will be maintained on the highway. yeah, you're right. And the recommendation talks about a standard condition, one of the standard conditions, the provision of a surface water management scheme, and then the provision of a maintenance arrangement for that surface water management scheme. Those are asked in the first instance. And then the third condition will relate to the responsibility.
Within our rating the conditions, do they have a timeline on it, or is it infinite? As long as that is stated.
Yeah, the conditions
It
will
has
be
to be
worded.
infinite.
The maintenance scheme will be put forward prior to what first occupation, and will then be implemented at all times thereafter. So it rolls on.
Last one. There is a provision for play area. Please don't next to the pond. Please make sure that you don't put it next to every still development will both stick, slides, and twigs next to the pond. Why? I just don't get it.
Yeah, so the local area for play in this scheme is on the same development level as the housing areas, and the attenuation areas are lower. So it's maybe not the easiest to see, but it's in this area here, level with the housing, and then the land slopes away down to the open space. Also, it's worth noting that there is no part of this proposal that would have a permanent a pond or permanent standing water. So the vast majority of these open spaces will be green open space that's suitable to walk on. So there isn't a pond, and the local area for play is actually elevated out of those areas anyway, next to kind of the back corner of the residential area.
Dixon.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Really quick one, the 6 conditions suggested by United Utilities, are they covered off in stipulation 3, I think, the GRH about the design review of the range?
Yes, that's correct. So all of the conditions that have been requested in the consultation responses, the latest consultation responses received, are would be reflected in our conditions. The wording of them will be amended slightly to align with our standard approach for conditions, but all of the requirements that we met for this conditions will be reflected.
Yeah, the resolution is designed to give you as a committee an indication of the subject we're going to cover, but to give us flexibility as officers to be able to add and subtract and amend that list of conditions as necessary when we get to the point of compiling on this. Because you've got Natural England as an ecology consultancy, GMU as an ecology consultancy, will probably suggest conditions that duplicate parts of each other, so we end up merging them. Same with range concepts and conditions. So where constantly suggests a specific word, quite
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I appreciated your presentation. It's a complex site or sites, so thanks. Garages, you say there aren't going to be any, but it's human nature to want to put things not in your house but somewhere else. And I've got a concern about how many sheds or places where things you don't want in your bedroom, okay, you've got the bedrooms, but there might well be more of the garden areas taken up with structures which are going to reduce the permeability of the ground because people want to store things. And I can well see that there might be more than one shed around, and the size of them might be quite considerable. So you say there's going to be homeowner packs. I've never actually seen a homeowner pack. I'd like to see just exactly what goes in them sometimes. But and I'm not sure just exactly whether it's advice or whether it's responsibilities or whatever, but is there any connection between how they use their outdoor space and basically preventing the surface area being taken up with structures that are just going to create more runoff? So I'm not sure whether you've thought that one through far enough, but I could see problems about lack of garages.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so generally with regards to kind of structures, sheds, impermeable surfaces, those matters are controlled through, generally for homeowners stuff like this, through development rights. So there are thresholds at which people can do things that don't require planning permission, and if they go above certain sizes, permission will be required. The gardens for the plots on this site are of a good size. So sometimes for housing developments we might see relatively kind of smaller gardens. These are actually reasonably sized. I know it's not the easiest to see on there. So it's not, the site doesn't have characteristics at which kind of the point where we might consider removing permitted development rights because of those concerns. I don't think that there hasn't been anything to indicate to us that the amount of space in the gardens is such that sheds going up within permitted development right kind of sizes would cause those kinds of problems. So it's not considered to be a significant issue, particularly with this site because of the amount of open green space that's being retained as well. So I understand the concerns, and I know kind of anecdotally that sometimes you can see houses and people have fill the gardens. We have to find kind of an appropriate balance between not unnecessarily imposing too many restrictions and control, and therefore necessitating lots of applications coming in for people just to put up sheds in their gardens, and finding that balance. So in short, the gardens are considered to be appropriate size, sheds going up within kind of permitted development right rules or hard surface patio areas, are considered to be. So yeah, we don't kind of have concerns along those lines. So it wouldn't are enough for us to consider removing development rights.
I am worried as to basically how many structures you could put up and whether there is sufficient, check on what is going on. Because human nature is as it is. If you've got children, you'll have areas where you need to park their bicycles, etc., and garden furniture, etc. So there's going to be a proliferation of structures in those gardens, which are basically going to take the place of a garage anyway. So, and I'm not sure whether it's there's sufficient, restriction on what you can do if you really want to extend your house. And I accept what you're saying about the permitted development, but how many permitted developments can you have, and is anybody going to take any notice anyway?
Yeah, so the point about garages, obviously the applicant kind of puts forward what they're proposing. We discuss it with them on this particular site. In this area for these types of houses, I think having 2 parking spaces for each house is acceptable. If garages were added, they would do kind of one of 3 things or a combination of all of them. It would either actually introduce more impermeable kind of hard standing to a site if you're having an external garage, or it would reduce the amount of habitable space within the house if it was an integrated garage, or it would reduce the number of houses being delivered on the site because more space would be needed for garages, and I think practically probably be all 3. So I think on a site that's already been so constrained, as an example, you'll have seen that a different approach is taken on the adjacent site, which is much larger, where some houses have integrated garages, some external, some just have parking, more of a mix. This now is a relatively small site of around 60 odd houses where space is already constrained. So I think no garages, but with sufficient parking, decent sized gardens that, you know, I'm sure you're right, people will put sheds in, but there is space within those gardens to have sheds and still have plenty of outside kind of community space. I think this is an appropriate way forward. So, and where you have concerns about whether people will follow the rules and what it will end up looking like, those concerns are absolutely valid, but they go beyond what we try and control through these types of permissions. So it's kind of a slightly different issue. And even if we were to ask the question to like United Utilities about runoff rates and shed, it's not something they engage on, because it's considered to be a fairly kind of minor impact on the overall water management on the site. So I share your concerns. I think they're rational, but we think what's being proposed here is appropriate, and any other options around control would only be removing permitted development rights or insisting on some garages to be added, but both of those options introduce other issues. So it's one of those, it's perhaps just one of the realities of housing developments and people, you know, having some free rein to do kind of what they want with their space, that sometimes things can end up in a way that you might think is not ideal. But
Thank you for that. It's a valid point as being addressed. Thank you for that.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. You said that there'd be parking for 2 cars at each of these houses. Fine. 2 questions. The first is, where do the visitors park? You can't park in someone else's driveway. Park on the road, don't restrict traffic. Is there a turning circle at the end for bigger vehicles?
yes, thank you. So to start with the turning circle point first, yes, you'll have seen that even on some of the plans there are tracking lines. There have been the technical highways documents provided. Yeah, highways have engaged rigorously on this point, even to the extent of where vehicles might end up oversailing kind of bits of kind of grass verge or small corners of gardens. So that's been looked at in detail and is acceptable. In terms of parking, then for this type of development, there are areas of highway where people would be able to park on the highway. So, for example, on the main road, on the main route through, and on the side roads as well, there are areas where there are between the driveways where there are gardens, where there's space where parking can happen. The road on the east obviously has one side of it, so you know, we don't take the approach of requiring kind of visitor parking courts. So parking would informally happen either on spaces when they're available or on the road.
Show me on that map then where the space is available.
Yes, so I'll point it out on the screen, but so I'm the space on this the driveway. So the spaces when cars get down here as well.
So the side roads are wide enough for cars to park in front of it.
Yeah, so they meet the highways requirements in terms of widths and standards, and they envisage those scenarios where people are parking on the roads and vehicles still to get past.
So we have this problem in other parts of my world. I don't know how to park in bigger than us.
Just on that, I can, Chairman, it is a standard highway design approach where the carriageway is around 6 metres wide, or 5.5 metres wide, which is enough for 2 vehicles to pass. And then you get this situation where you have a car park outside the house here, a car park outside the house there, and it introduces bits of chicanes into the road. But that's part of the highway design because that slows speed down and makes the whole environment a bit safer. Is the logic behind it. I appreciate you'll say that instances where it gets too congested, but that is the logic.
Got some areas if the car is parked, not in the drive. I don't know how emergency it will get parked somewhere. But another second.
Highway authority have been incredibly rigorous about the internal road layout.
Needs smaller cars. Can I just add, another question. Of these sites, of the 350 houses, 62 houses that we're talking about, when will these affect our 5-year supply?
So they're taken into account, the calculations have been updated recently. They're taken into account in our current supply and envisaged for delivery.
Yeah, the council produces a 5-year housing supply figure at the 1st of April every year. So that looks back over the delivery from the previous 12 months. And where there are outline planning permissions, we can allocate a certain amount of the development total to come forward in the 5-year, earlier parts of the 5-year period and the rest later. In this case, this is a full planning permission, so that allows us to allocate more of the development to the earlier phases of the 5 years. So the answer is it will be calculated in the 5-year figure next time that's done, probably towards the back end of this year, but it will be a higher figure because of the full application than many other outlines.
And I think in terms of the local plan, this is envisaged that it'd be a site that's delivered early if and when the local plan is updated, which should be done kind of within the next year or so, that this would be a site that would come forward early in that plan.
But I think to answer the question you're coming to, Councillor Andrews, it's not the case that a decision today impacts the 5-year housing supply in terms of how we determine application. Yes, the more certainty through it being a full application or an outline and then a reserve factor, the better it is. Councillor Redcliffe.
I mean, this is without doubt a challenging application because of the situation. I'm very satisfied that the amount of work that there is to mitigate some of these risks is satisfactory. I would have been very concerned about this particular site if we'd been looking at 142 houses. We're now looking at 60, and I think that is a very big difference, and it takes into account the challenges of this particular site. I also think it's important that we talk about the 5-year supply, but you've already emphasised that this is part of the master plan. It's already got strategic allocation, and we are now sensitively putting reasonable number bearing in mind the challenges of the site. The first question is on page 7. There's a sentence that says flood compensation, right at the very bottom, the flood compensation areas are at either side of the access road on the school road frontage and to the north of the site alongside the Bathurst Lane neighbour. And then there's further details. I had a look, but it didn't quite answer the question. A lot of people reading that would say, are we absolutely confident, as these are access roads, that these access roads are not going to be flooded and therefore cut off people from their homes? It's an obvious question, but I have to ask. That's the first one.
Yes, thanks for that question. There are fairly significant levels changes between the development platform, so where the houses and roads are going to go, and then the land for attenuation. So attenuation is being achieved basically by providing capacity within the land to store water in these frequent and kind of rare occurrences, and also by lifting the development plane outside of that risk area, and the roads are within that, so they're elevated out of that space, and the technical details around the capacity, the shape, the size are being again interrogated by the Environment Agency through multiple rounds of consultation and back and forth and redesign. And it's the Environment Agency who obviously administer kind of flood risk and look at these issues, and they're happy with those characteristics. And then in terms of highways have looked at these kind of issues around safety, but mainly it's achieved by having a difference in the development level areas.
Thank you. My second question, we have some very useful additional information for the viability assessment that have been requested in the past, and it which I think is enormously helpful in terms of verifying the claim is not viable, the difference in figures. I just wanted to raise another point, though, whether this is valid. Although we are very concerned, obviously, that in an ideal world we should have 1 of 6 contributions, by the way, about school places, sort of tell you that in the last 5 years there's been a 3% decrease in the requirement for school places, school rolls going down. The prediction for the next 5 years, I was reading the other day, is a 7% reduction. So what I'm pointing out is I think there will be more cases that the local education authority may well say there's existing capacity in schools, depending on there will be variations. Building new houses, you might have to find a private school. But that's the trend. But when we come to, on the same page, there's a reference to the mix of housing. We've often expressed concerns about the mix. Because I've heard councillors, and I've said them myself, there seems to be a predominance with 4 and 5 bedroom detached houses. And we see very few semi-detached houses. Now, I know we haven't technically got affordable housing in this application, but is there an argument for saying by providing 24 semi-detached, it's a significant proportion of the houses here, 12 detached houses, and then some 4 bedrooms as well. That obviously, in a sense, will be providing not technically more affordable housing, but more affordable housing. And therefore, the mix and the range of housing provided within this application is actually encouraging in my view. I just wanted to comment. Wanted confirmation that the point I was making was a valid one. Semis are rarely seen out here without semi-detached.
I think it's a very valid point, even more so it's 24 pairs of cells, which is 48 cells. And also just picking up on the point about school numbers, I can confirm also that slightly relevant. A houses have even going down from a 3-4 to a 2-4 entry. So it is an ongoing trend. Councillor Barrington.
Thank you. I just want to clarify my understanding on this. It seems to be a disparate right fall under the auspices of a residence management. When I sort of piece them all together, there's the play area, the ditches, you said earlier on in the presentation. Lane Mods talks about cycle paths and footpaths that require private management that they do not to join the carriageway. There's fences and walls. There seems to be a lot of stuff here that could be potentially costly, and my question would be, because I don't know whether this falls within planning considerations, but what point do you actually start to measure the viability of loading of so many elements and costs potentially that when it's divisible between overly 60 properties, it becomes untenable actually. I mean, looking at this, I must admit I would be very nervous if I knew the facts about having property there, how much it cost at the end of the year, particularly if the ditches got silted up, JCBs, etc. Hell of a lot of cost going on.
It's a good point, shall we? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, the short answer is that as part of the planning process, that's not something we directly consider. The slightly kind of broader but more vague answer is that obviously when we go through a process of allocating sites, we look at various characteristics and suitability, we look at kind of sustainability. A lot of those characteristics often directly or indirectly kind of impact on these considerations that you're talking about, because obviously the more kind of appropriate a site is for development, you'd expect lower development costs and lower ongoing costs as well. You're right that this site has a number of features that will require maintenance. The majority of those are fairly typical, so foot and cycle links aren't adopted, areas of open space, play areas, that's standard for the way that developments come forward these days. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that we don't directly take that into consideration, but the broader answer is that indirectly these things are considered. Yes, this will have an impact on future occupiers of the site, but it's a balance between, you know, delivering neighbourhoods and development that have facilities and have good levels of amenity, and the way that the planning system works and development comes forward at the moment and has done for a while, is that's how these things are resourced and financed. So yeah, I know I've not kind of answered the question perhaps to how you'd like it to be answered, but that's from a planning perspective.
You have answered, because I imagine your answer would be along those lines, that it isn't something materially that we should consider today, and I wanted to check that. It's just the way it is, I guess, but it, as I say, but hey ho, that's got a thing to do with the decision we make.
Thank you. Vice Chairman in.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a useful debate that we've had this morning, and I think as we approach the end of our current local plan, it's self-evident that the applications that will come forward will be slightly more nuanced and slightly more testing, because they are difficult areas, and we live on a floodplain part of the country, so you know we're never far away from these issues that we've rehearsed this morning. And from my point of view, we always want to look for contributions within our applications, but we also have to be aware of the fact that what are the gains on this particular application, and how far has it moved? You know, we've already highlighted the fact that the number of houses have reduced by 50% on the original application, and there's been some stringent representations from Environment Agency in terms of flood management schemes, and we need to be very aware of the fact that because of the conditions that have been put in place, that until the footpaths and access to and from the site for pedestrians have been answered, there's no development that can take place above ground. And I think, you know, my give on this one is, while we're not getting financial contributions as such, although there is £50,000 set aside, but the 106 contributions are less than we would look for. We are gaining a development which has got large open spaces, and we often as a committee say that we're slightly concerned about overdevelopment, and that's not something that you could contribute to this particular site. And we need to be mindful of the fact that it is part of an allocated site. So on balance, I would say that with the strong conditionality that have been placed on the application, that having heard representations, I'd be happy to recommend the approval of this particular application. Thank you.
If there are no more points to debate, no more questions, can we move on to oh, please.
Thank you, Chair. The viability, is the £50,000 the cost of the footpaths, or is it just an amount?
Thank you. If I recall correctly, it's been generated by the Highway Authority with regards to their estimates around delivering a footway solution down School Road, and ultimately it is an amount of money that they have said is acceptable in conjunction with that condition to alleviate their concerns around this kind of development progressing further down the line. So it's effectively the conditions that they've, through those negotiations, discussed. But I should make it clear that it is a voluntary offer from the applicant to the Highway Authority that sits outside of their viability position. So it's not been taken into consideration. So they haven't effectively benefited from their balance assessment in their viability. The viability is being run completely blind to that figure. So they're not effectively claiming a discount from their viability assessment to offset that.
Thank you for that. I think that's one of the nuances that Councillor Evans has. Councillor Evans has indicated that he's happy to propose recommendation. The recommendation is on page 334, which is the City Grant Plan Director in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, subject to the stipulations on pages 33 and on page 6. With that voted, could I have a second, please? All those in favour? Thank you very much for that. Let's have a couple of minutes recess while we have a change of officers and get back together in a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So, as Chair rightly says, next item on the agenda is number 2, which is 25/0113, and that's land adjacent to Peel Road, Westby with Plumpton. The application is for the installation of a 14.77 hectare solar farm with associated equipment and infrastructure, which includes solar arrays, transformer stations, CCTV columns, posted wire fencing, access track, and landscaping arrangements. So the application site is as per the red line in the image on the right hand side. I've dropped an aerial image in to just work out where the site is in relation to main points within the locality. So this roundabout to the north is the bottom of the M55. We've got B&Q here. That's Preston New Road that runs off to Kirkham. We've then got Peel Road, which filters down that way, and then eventually into Balham Road, which continues on its route. We've got Fairhaven Golf Club, we've got Green Drive Golf Club, and then Blackpool Airport to the west. The site is within countryside and is designated as such in the file local plan. We don't have any speakers. So the site here is the brownfield in the centre of the image. It's in arable agricultural use at the moment. It's relatively flat in topography. Peel Road, which lies to the west, is set to a higher land level, and land levels continue to rise in a northerly fashion towards the New Road and towards the west. Can't see on that, but we've got the new Moss Road that runs in a north-south direction just to the west of that image. The site itself, as you can see, it is arable. It's obviously a plough state at the time that aerial image was taken. We have a mature hedgerow boundary to Peel Road, and the remainder of the 3 other boundaries of the site are made from post and wire fencing. I've dropped this slide in as well just to give you an impression really in terms of site's rural location, but it's not isolated. There is quite a lot of development which surrounds the site. So we have large-scale caravan park to the northwest. We've got a large-scale substation to the west. We've got farm buildings. We've got a business park to the south, and we've got a waste transfer and management site beyond that business park to the southwest as well. There are two of the solar farms in proximity, so we've got Staining Wood solar farm immediately to the east, and then we have Lawns Farm solar farm to the south. That was approved by planning committee back in 2022. In addition, we have the yellow lines, which demonstrate pylon lines which cross the site. So the one to the east of the application site, that's a large scale pylon line. Which at that point now have one of the large scale pylon lines which connects to more power pylon lines, and then underground connectivity to the substation. I've put up some Google aerial imagery just to give a flavour really in terms of the development that is adjacent to the site. So in this image, the aerial image to the left hand corner, that demonstrates where the image is taken from and the direction towards where it's taken towards. So this is taken from the north, looking in a southeast direction. We can see that we've got the caravan park, the large scale substation here, and also then the pylon lanes which are crossing the site. This is taken from Peel Road, looking in a north-easterly direction. So of importance in this image, certainly you can see the hedgerow which bounds Peel Road. That continues for the majority of Peel Road. It is broken in part where you get access arrangements or just gaps within that hedgerow coverage. This is a viewpoint from Staining Wood. You can see the existing solar farm in the foreground with the application site, proposed solar farm in the background. And then this is a view from Preston New Road. So it's from the aerial images up from the north, looking south. Unfortunately, what you don't really pick up in these aerial images is the topography. So as I mentioned before, the land rises in a northerly direction. So this land level is to a higher land level than what the application site is, kind of like dips down. So moving on to the proposed development. As I said earlier, it's a 30 megawatt solar farm, and that's anticipated to power over 4,465 households and saving 2,918 tons of carbon dioxide per year. It's going to have an operational life of 40 years, and following that time, the land can be reinstated to agricultural use. The electricity that's created, that will be transferred to the national grid, which is the substation position to the west. That'll be via a battery energy storage system. Now that particularly does not form part of this current plan application, but planning permission does exist for that battery energy storage system approved by late 2023 by that plan. So this arrays are south facing. Because of the battery energy storage facility, there isn't as much need for the ancillary bits and bobs that we practice expect in a solar farm. So we just have literally the arrays and the transformers. We have the CCTV security, postal light fencing, and gravel track. There is also United Utilities water main, which is demonstrated by this line here, and you can see obviously the solar panels have been sited to avoid that water main, and we expect the easement that's associated to that water main as well. This next slide shows the bits and bobs that's proposed within the scheme. So the top image is the solar panels. Importantly, they range in height between 2.7 to 3.3 metres. That range is to reflect the fact that the site is within a flood zone. So those heights reflect the anticipated variance in flood levels across the site. They are mounted on spike supports, which you can see in the image, and they'll be piled directly into the ground with a depth of approximately 1.6 metres. The left-hand image is just a snapshot of the post and rail fence. There's provisions in place to consider ecological movements, so there's badger gates and gaps so that small animals can enter and leave the application site. The scheme also includes provision of CCTV cameras there to 2.5 metres in height. The number of 48 that's been shown on plan that was indicative and is subject to further assessment by the applicant. There's also 4 transformers dotted around the application site, so they are positioned in the, you can just make them out, I know it's very small, but these black boxes here. So they have a footprint of 6.1 metres by 2.4, 6 metres, and ranging height between 3.9 and 4.2 metres. So the scheme submitted indicated the colouring of these transformers to be white, but due to potential concerns for visual impact of that colour, we've negotiated with the applicant to get a more muted moss colour. Landscape proposals. Importantly, the hedgerow to the east on Peel Road, that will be retained. We're going to have new tree plants in this area and around the best facility. There's going to be new hedgerow boundaries created all the way around the application site, to the south, to the east, and to the west. That's also going to be dotted with trees. The existing and the proposed hedgerows, they're all going to be maintained at a minimum height of 3 metres. So if you recall, for example, the height of the fencing and the CCTV cameras, with hedgerows being maintained at that 3 metres, they should act as a nice screen to those elements of the proposal. The scheme also incorporates significant biodiversity gains that's provided primarily through the landscaping on the site and delivers a 91.9% uplift in habitat units, and that isn't a typo, it is 2,281 hedgerow units on the site, and that's formed primarily because of the amount of hedgerow, new hedgerow planted to the north, east and southern boundaries. Presentation, I have focused not on every single issue that's detailed in the report. I would be here for quite a long time otherwise, so it is just mainly upon principle, which includes countryside designation, the use of agricultural land, and we've also looked at the landscape and visual impact, as well as the planning balance. So, in terms of principle, we've got general support for renewable energy within our local plan by virtue of policy CL3. But there's also very similar guidance within the National Planning Policy Framework. Importantly, paragraph 168 requires significant weight to be provided or to be given to the benefits associated with renewable energy. The site is within the countryside. The relevant policy in our local plan is policy GD4. That is a restrictive policy, obviously to retain the rural character of the countryside. It does allow for development in exceptional circumstances, and one of those, which is relevant to this application, is criterion A, and that supports use which are appropriate to a rural area. To demonstrate that appropriateness, the applicant has provided an alternative site assessment that's considered the availability of previously developed land. That has concluded that there aren't any previously developed land sites available, and that offers justification for the countryside location. One of the pitfalls of the scheme, policy CL3, which is the renewables policy, that requires consideration and confirms that development should not be sited on the best and most versatile agricultural land within the borough, so that what we call BMV agricultural land is grade 1, 2, and 3A. There is exception to that though, and that's where it's demonstrated that poorer quality land cannot be used, and that the benefits of the development outweigh the loss of the investment of versatile land. The applicant has provided agricultural land classification assessment that confirms that the land constitutes 94% grade 2 agricultural land, with the remainder being grade 3A, which basically means that the site in its entirety is considered to be best and most versatile. Moving on to landscape character and visual impact. This is a further test required by GD4. Again, it's a consideration with the National Planning Policy Framework. With regards to landscape character, the site that's surrounded are characterised as the lowest of landscape designations. They're not a national park, they're not an Norfolk Broads, they're not an area of outstanding natural features, they're not green belt. The site is, however, greenfield and it is undeveloped, so does obviously positively contribute towards the countryside character. The scheme obviously provides for solar arrays across the whole of the site. It's unquestionably going to change the character and appearance of that site to one that is certainly more the industrial in use. But the impact is primarily to the site itself, with a lesser impact to the surrounding area, and that's because of the built form that we mentioned previously, the landscape strategy that's proposed within the scheme. From a visual impact perspective, there's no public rights of way at all on the site, there's no public rights of way within the surrounding area at all. There's no footway to Peel Road. There are some views which are largely going to be from cars using Peel Road, and there's two properties with side elevations with windows that may have views towards the application site as well. They're sited to the north, approximately 130 metres, and to the south, 260 as well. Clearly, from a professional point of view, the existing hedgerow to Peel Road, the planting of trees, that's going to reduce the amount of visual impact for those people in cars, and similarly for occupants of the house. So conclusions in terms of character and visual impact: yes, there's going to be significant impact on the character of the site. That's going to result in encroachment of built form into the countryside, but the effect on available views will be minor. It's going to be prolonged. They're going to be there for 40 years, but will be removed after that 40-year period, so that impact is going to be temporary, and then after that period they'll also be decommissioned and the land reinstated. There's a number of conditions advised. There's 4 important ones, which are key in terms of landscape and visual impact. That's the decommissioning and reinstatement after a 40-year period. There's also required for decommissioning and reinstatement if the site isn't generating electricity for a period greater than 12 months. We want to ensure that the new landscaping that's proposed, these trees and hedgerow boundaries, we want that to be delivered as in the initial phase of construction. That's obviously to give the landscaping greater opportunity to mature as the construction and development progresses, as opposed to undertaking the landscaping after construction and operation of the solar farm. There's no other technical matters to prohibit development. We now move on to the plan and balance. So that requires a balancing and exercise and influencing then the determination of the application. So we need to look at the harms balanced against the benefits of the scheme. So the harms are outlined above. So we have the loss of the agricultural land, the industrialisation of the site, minor landscape and visual harm, minor ecological harm through use of habitat. That, however, is mitigated by construction techniques such as the construction environmental management plan and the retention or provision of new habitats. We have work within the flood risk area, but again, it's been demonstrated through acceptance from the Environment Agency that development is not at risk from and would not increase the risk off-site, which is subject to mitigation. There's also minor impact to peak reserves, but again, that will be mitigated by management plan to minimise disturbance to that peak. Again, it is a long period, but the reported times are only for a temporary period. So moving on to the benefits, the 30 megawatt solar farm, it's going to provide a domestic benefit to 4,465 households and will provide a saving of 2019 through 2018 tons of carbon dioxide per year. The framework, the NPPF, requires significant weight given to the benefits associated with renewable energy, so that was weighs heavily in favour of the scheme. We also have job creation during the construction and operational phase of development. The agricultural activity will be stopped, so obviously use of arable land, that will not continue whilst the solar farm is in operation. However, that will allow the soil quality time to, rejuvenate. So after the 40-year period expires, it should be full of the necessary minerals and nutrients to promote its agricultural use. There's also habitat creation and significant gains for biodiversity. So when balancing the harms to the development against the benefits of the scheme, in particular the renewable benefits, it's considered that those benefits outweigh the harms that have been reported. And the recommendation of 2 members is to grant planning permission, and that's been delegated to the service director on completion of a unilateral undertaking, which takes into consideration provision of skylark and lapwing habitat, subject to adoption of the habitat regulation assessment, statutory B&G condition, and a schedule of appropriate conditions.
Questions?
Right. Yeah. Sorry, but I do. I hate the trouble the causing us. Has the cumulative impact of tax zero to the solar farm been taken into account when we're talking about the balance?
Landscape individual farm. They are quite
When
close.
you put that area up. An area of land that's pretty much covered with.
I think, to explain the thought process, there's only going to be very few vantage points where you'll ever see the proposed solar farm against the backdrop or foreground of the existing solar farm. What's more likely to happen is you're going to be travelling along Peel Road, see the application site for the solar farms on it. You'll be travelling further along Peel Road, then you might notice parts of the solar farm. The Staining Wood solar farm, when you make that corner on Peel Road, you'll see glimpses of that solar farm in the background, with this in the foreground. The road level drops, and I think what will happen is this proposed solar farm will start to obscure visibility of the solar farm. And then bearing in mind you have 3-metre hedgerows along the application site back to the west, plus other hedgerows.
I appreciate that visual part.
It is, but what else you got?
To the farming land. It's the harm to the loss of agricultural land, the loss of use of that land to industrialise it, to make it into non-industrial for the next 40 years.
It is, and it is a reported harm. Now, negative, then the level of harm is outweighed by the immediate benefits. So that's the consideration for members.
How do you gauge that?
There is no gauging to it. I mean,
It's your opinion
there's
against
certain
somebody else's
benchmarks in
benchmark.
terms of appeal case law. So the appeals that are bred, they certainly take into consideration what's the value of the land, what the renewable benefits outweigh that loss. What I think we should also consider is the availability of agricultural land throughout Flora, which is quite significant. And that is how the application site is proportioned to that overall amount.
So where are we drawing the line?
There is nothing in policy to do to draw that line. But I think if we need to be wary as we draw the line, with this application, then that helps set the precedent for the other part of be considering.
During the construction phase, how long are we talking? How long are we? What's the length of time?
It's, I think, obviously members considered the March, December, that was an 18-month period. This is reportedly 6. The construction route of vehicles is on the 5, on the A583, Field Road, the application site, and back out.
Yeah, we're all from there.
It's, I think it's more this bottom section of Field Road as you go uphill, get where adjacent to the farming gets particularly bad. I think obviously what you have is a lot of vehicle activity along Field Road. That isn't just cars, it's large scale vehicles as well. But the number of large scale, so HGV vehicle construction phase, it's remember it's reported to be at 38 and obviously it's smaller beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's 35. It's a big plot of land. It's not the biggest in the world, I get it, but it is.
The members debate, drawing a line and some numbers, and it echoes what's in the report, the opposite presentation, but we are not invited to question the need for social development. There is no figure, there is no this one is enough and the next one will be down. That is not how national policy is set out. So where we draw the line in terms of need for solar development, we don't, essentially. And it's similar with the loss of best in most versatile agricultural land. There is no line, there is no number, and as the opposite said, it is a matter of planning judgment. It is to be avoided, as policy sets out. It's a planning balance. Just to aid the debate about, there's no hard and fast numbers, like there is with a 5-year supply, often we talked about. Questioning the need for the solar development, that's not open to us, not available. A balancing of harms versus benefits, of course, is, and that is where, if you like, you could draw the line. Not around it as a number or as a maximum. Thank you.
Right. Okay. I will read it.
choice. We clearly do have a choice. It's just that the assessment and decision making has to consider the impact against what benefits will accrue. To answer that point, going to the national grid, so there won't be any direct benefit of bioreactors. Obviously, in the interest of security of energy, there will be benefits. Reliance more on renewables and less on importing gas, oil, etc. So in theory, reduction in cost that way.
When you said that 12-month figure, if it's not putting energy back in, who monitors that? How do we know that? How would we know when that? In the conditions, isn't it?
Thank you. It is interesting to note that basically no good agricultural land is safe now. Basically, it can always be second best to national our national energy needs, which doesn't necessarily mean around here. It means in places further afield, and I find that very worrying. But my question is this, for the next 40 years, this land is not going to be productive in any way for agriculture? Well, I seem to recall that we did look at one solar farm application in which the solar panels were raised so that grazing could take place. Now, have I forgotten something, or did I make it up? I don't know. But I do seem to think that there was a chance of using the land. I mean, you say the land will recover fertility over 40 years, but let's face it, if you're grazing any land, you've got a good deal more fertility going into it. And I'm just wondering whether there is any chance of using this land if they didn't put these panels so low, if they were raised slightly, that the grazing could take place.
Yes, you are correct, Council. So some of the other solar farm developments that we consider do have what we call a dual use. So they have solar operation and they will continue agricultural grazing. Now, this scheme does not include grazing provision. There may be reasoning for that, which I am not aware of. What I will say is that the land is obviously used for arable farming at the moment, with crop growing. So whether the land, for whatever reason, because obviously there is surface water and floodstone issues, so that may be prohibitive to grazing of farm animals, for example. I don't know, but we have to obviously consider the application that's in front of us, and the application in front of us will include the grazing of the land.
Thanks for that, but the fact that it is possible to use land productively for 40 years, be in a different sort of way, I find it puzzling that at a time when we're talking about national security, we also have to think of national security in terms of our food supplies. And if anyone says, "Oh, we've got to grow more ourselves," we're actually sacrificing our land for keeping the lights on, when in fact we could use the land or continue to use it, but this applicant has decided they don't want to be bothered with it. Well, I think it should be considered. But obviously, is that within our remit to basically say go away and think about it in a different way?
Well, like I said, we have to consider the application that's in front of us. There may be a genuine reason why grazing the land is not an option, either for the applicant or for the land itself. But clearly we need to get back to the topic. We talked about temporary loss of land. It's not permanent loss, it's temporary. It might not be temporary in my lifetime, but nonetheless it is still temporary. It will be removed after that 40-year period, and the agricultural land will then be reinstated.
I think you make some very good points there. As Vice Chairman, I would agree. This is a point that's worth following up in the future, but it's not specific to the application before us today. But thank you for raising the principle. And that's noted. Moving on to Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. As far as I can see, these 3 acres that we have solar panels on will be something like 100 acres. That's 100 acres in my ward. We expect to have a wind farm out in the Irish Sea. I think we're in danger of putting too much emphasis on power, especially on the cloudy day or windless day, and not enough emphasis in supporting and feeding us. I find it difficult.
Thank you. Let's bring in Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually trying to portray a different viewpoint on this so far. I actually think, given the benefits and harms that Rob's laid out to us, that the benefits do outweigh the harms in this instance. I think we do need energy. Anybody who thinks we're going to go home tonight thinks that the lights are going to out and going to survive, I suspect they're probably not. So I do believe we need this sort of thing. I actually think it's in an area that can sustain it. I mean, there's a great big caravan park there that you could argue, why is that there, if you wanted to take another argument. So I believe that this is an important thing that we need to develop. I don't think comparing it to the wind farm is relevant. I think the wind farm is a completely different issue altogether, and something that I personally thought to get on to. My concern just on one issue is regarding the birds. Fowl Bird Club have put in an objection to it, and you did mention the disruption to lapwings and skylarks. I just wondered if you could just elaborate on that for me, Rob, please.
Constantine, a planning application as our ecological consultants. We use Greater Manchester Ecological Unit, as we use Natural England as well. So Fowl Bird Club did raise an objection in terms of development and the potential loss of lapwing and skylark habitats. Development in compensation proposes replacement habitat. So the habitat won't be on site for skylark and lapwings. It will be, it's to the other side of the motorway, but it's of an equivalent size. There will be landscaping planting undertaken to encourage species on the site, and there will be a monitoring regime as well to monitor the success or otherwise potentially of that replacement habitat. So when we've consulted with our Greater Manchester Ecological Unit, they haven't raised objection to that solution in terms of mitigation and are happy raising no objection to the scheme. Natural England, they don't consider protected species as such as the lapwing and skylark. they offer a different set of comments, which is relative to, I think you discussed it in the application before, what we term functionally linked land. So whether or not the land of the application site is functionally linked to the designations that exist in the estuary. This application is probably 18 months old. The main reasons for delay are concerning this issue with regard to functionally linked land, comments and meetings with Natural England, submission by the applicant of numerous shadow habitat regulation assessments, the latest of which concludes that there isn't any functionally linked land, that there's no need for mitigation, and Natural England don't raise any objection to that. Obviously bearing in mind that we have strong comments from Natural England raising an objection, and Greater Manchester Ecological Unit not raising an objection. In terms of ecology, then we have to consider, again, things in the round. We have to acknowledge there are harms associated to the loss of habitat on site, but they are going to be compensated for, and the unilateral undertaker will ensure that that is provided as well as part of the development.
Can I bring in Councillor Red?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Gardner's comments regarding this, is that we've got to be very careful that we make no reference to potential other projects like the wind farm, etc. We have to concentrate on the application before us. And I'm looking very closely at page 58, where they have quotes from the NPPF. Not require, planning authority should not require applicants to demonstrate the overall need for renewable or low carbon energy, and will give significant weight to the benefits associated with renewable and low carbon energy generation, and that small scale and community led projects provide a valuable contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And then policy CL3, development potential is significant within file. Opportunities for renewable development should be maximised whilst ensuring that adverse impacts are addressed. And this is where I'm coming to. It basically falls on whether we feel, as far as possible, that whatever adverse impacts there may be, those have either been measured, assessed, and mitigated if they do indeed represent negative impact. I feel that the only thing, yes, I think it's a pity that this is best and most versatile agricultural land. That's not ideal. But that said, the only effect that I can see that this particular project development would have is anybody right above the site. If you fly over it, you'll see the solar farm. You drive around it, there are no public rights of way. The infrastructure of the roads doesn't give you particular views. So for the vast majority of people, they will see no difference at all. Sourcing it is not a problem. There might be 1 or 2 trips a week, we're told. Yes, there will be some disruption in terms of construction. And the other consideration, I've been thinking about this, there was a question, and it's a fair question, what local benefits will there be for these 4,465 local properties? I think the answer to this is that we have to remember that there is a strategy, etc., in terms of renewable energy, and also it's all over the country. Solar farms are actually developing in all areas of the country. therefore, the argument that what are the local benefits? Well, they're national benefits when you look at the holistic picture. But actually, we will be benefiting locally from projects that are not in file because they're going to be fed into the national grid. So I think this is a case that we may have to just step up from a very parochial view and go, this is part of the contribution. But for me, the critical planning judgments are really looking at the adverse impacts. One, how we've mitigated them, and one, what assessment, how many adverse impacts are there, other than a genuine concern about the cumulative effect and the number and the area, the number of hectares, of acres of land, where, you know, I can understand the argument that goes in some ways it industrialises land, but actually the reality of that is you don't see it, and you don't feel it. I can't see that there are significant adverse impacts. I feel that this is the, and I would be prepared to actually move this. If that's not appropriate at the moment, I know you can park it, but I actually think this is, in terms of planning policy, I think the right thing to do, despite many concerns, some of which I share, but are not backed up by planning.
Completely agree with what Councillor Redcliffe has just said. I'd like to second the proposal. Please.
Before we go any further comments, Councillor Deeks?
Thanks very much. Yeah, I don't like solar farms and agricultural land, but what I like and what I don't like is unfortunately, having read through it, I can't see any action we could take to say no to this, which is defensible. I don't think because I think there is biodiversity gain. In fact, that's one of the things which is really good because we're such a rural area, an agricultural area. We have a distinct lack of trees and hedgerows in this borough, to almost one of the worst figures nationally in the country, because our land is working agricultural land. At least that puts something back there. Those hedgerows and that, I still think they were temporary. But I couldn't vote against it even though I don't like it.
We will have to disagree because I have a geology training and that our timescale is somewhat different, but I do take the point, it's very valid. Councillor Barrett.
Energy security versus food security is a philosophical debate for another day. That's three speakers. There's no real reason not to improve this. I think the one little caveat I'd say is that when you're setting a precedent, can we make it clear in the decision, in the documentation, proximity to the substation was good reason
Thank you, Councillor. Let me just bring Andrew Stanley.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can make something explicit in that, but as part of the overall assessment of the application, we're looking at the impact of it. So we're looking at the fact that it is right next door to this facility. That itself is just over the road from the substation. So the disturbance, construction work and visual impact of other infrastructure is as minimal as it probably could be. Whereas if we had a site that was much more distant, you would end up having to dig up a load of roads and have a load of potential factors which now quite underlying. And those would all need to be considered in our planning balance. So I think in this case, we can't, or in any case, we can't do it explicitly, but it is an implicit part.
Thank you for that. Before we move on, are there any more questions or in that? The recommendation is that the decision to grant be delegated to the Service Director for Planning and Building Control, subject to the various stipulations and conditions on pages 97 to 110. Councillor Redcliffe and Councillor Griffiths previously rejected the programme. In that case, can we take a vote on that? Those in favour? Those against? In that case, it is carried. Thank you very much for that. I propose a very short break while we change officers again for the final item. Land southwest of Wheaton Road. It's an application to vary conditions of the previous planning permission. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ethan to give the presentation. Again, we have no speakers on the items.
Thank you, Chairman. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You may have come across this application before. There was an original one which the committee had refused. There was actually two applications that came with it. There was 0045 and 0085. The first one was refused at committee. The second one was refused under delegated powers, assuming it was going to be the same impact. This was subsequently appealed and in January this year it was allowed. So we're looking now at just a change of that original decision to change the layout from a mix of semi-detached and detached to 5 detached dwellings. So the site, just to remind you, is just at the edge of Singleton to the south. See what star is, and then the site plan just in the red box side. It is an allocated site for housing development, and as mentioned, it has been approved on that basis. So a brief summary of the application breakdown. The original one was for 2 pairs of semi-detached properties, so 4 in total, and then a single detached on the end. As mentioned, it was objected to and it was refused due to a lack of symmetry, not being kind of out of place with the local character, being excessive in scale. The inspector subsequently allowed the appeal based on the variety of house types in the area, and because it is at the edge of the conservation area, there's a mix of agricultural buildings, there's a pub, and detached houses there. So overall, it was determined that it was acceptable in principle. What we're looking at today is just whether the change from the semi-detached and detached to 5 detached is a significant difference to want that change. So this is the 2 variation of conditions they're proposing. So condition number 2 is just to change the house types. The house types themselves will be the same as the original house types allowed, except there will now be a gap in between them. There is no change to the overall design of the house, with the exception of a few windows now in the side elevations. And to accommodate this change of housing layout, we're applying to vary condition 9, which is the landscaping scheme in and around the site. So we've got some pictures here of the scheme change. In terms of the landscaping change, it's mostly the resizing of the front garden areas, a little bit smaller to allow the gaps in between houses and the driveways. And then in between plots 3 and 4, which is over this side, there is a removal of a hedge that was in a line, and that's now kind of a fence and a walkway. Properties 1 and 5 on either end are now slightly closer to the boundary, just to allow the separation towards the middle. Got another site plan here showing the fencing layout. So the blue lines are the proposed fencing. You can just see the fence where the hedge was is now aligned in through the middle. Yeah, through here. So this was the hedge, and it's now the fence through here. The trees are in the same position, and the rear garden areas are the same as well. And the houses themselves have maintained that element of symmetry to the front by keeping the same design with just a detached one here. So some site photos of the area. This is the site. There's a pub opposite, and as you view from the south, and this is the view from the north, and this is the site looking over to the rear. And then this is a visualization of the change. So as you see, it's the exact same house types. We just put a gap in between here and here. And this one has been pushed slightly to the side a bit more to allow for the space. housing types as well, just a bit more detail of all the elevations. The main changes are we now have side windows in each of the blocks, with new concerns about amenity and privacy between properties. A new condition has been imposed to obscure glaze these side-facing windows that are inside. The rest will be normal windows. So the main considerations to look at into today is the impact of the change from 4 semi-detached and a detached to 5. The original principle of development is allowed and accepted. It's just whether that change is significant enough that this would create additional harm. But in terms of character of the area, that's a separation of semi-detached to detached. As we know, Singleton is known as a group of semi-detached farmers' cottages through the street, maintain a linear pattern of development. However, in the site itself, there is a lot more sporadic houses, there's detached, there's agricultural buildings, there's farms. And these 5 houses will maintain a linear form. They're not going back, not create additional depth, and they will maintain a consistent build line through. And they maintain a kind of visual image of symmetry by maintaining those house types. As mentioned, potential loss of privacy to neighbours. So this has now been obscure glazed to the sides. The other amendments haven't changed that. There's big separation between the site and neighbouring dwellings. We received response from LCC Highways requesting new conditions. However, as the access and overall scale of the development is remained the same, the original inspector had access to these conditions originally, and it's not been deemed significant enough to request changes at this point. The original highway conditions will remain. So looking at the adjacent properties in the area, we see nearby we have this big detached house here. There's the pub that's opposite, the agricultural buildings, and then there's a modern semi-detached properties here, showing a mix of variety at the immediate site. And then when we're looking in Singleton as a whole, we can see there's a great variety of finishes, penetrations, detailing, styles. Therefore, the change to 5 detached in itself would not be alien or out of character with any consistency. Some more properties in the area featuring modern properties, older cottages. And down here we see from a distance that even when we've got the pairs of cottages together, there's still wide space in between, and they are of different finish and styles. So thank you for the presentation, and if you've got any questions, let me know.
Let's move on to questions and debate, and the first hand I believe is Councillor Dixon.
I think we've been legged up by the inspector, haven't we, really? You know, we didn't like it in the first place, and it's back with us now, and I think the inspector's decision, it gives us not very many places to go. Perversely, I actually think, looking at the pictures of the 5 detached ones, it looks like less mass than the semi-detached ones. You can at least see through the site to the back, so it's probably practical, but again, like I said in the last one, given the inspector continues, I don't think it's defensible really.
I think you're correct in what you say, Councillor, that 2 previous applications have been overturned. It does lead to significant condition, but you can't presuppose that's the case. Any further questions or discussion? Councillor Dixon.
I feel very much the same as Councillor Dixon actually. We're back to the corner with nowhere to go. I don't see that we, even if we wanted to object or say anything about it, or I just feel that we could go back to appeal with already been made. The only thing I'm thinking, is it going to be more profitable for the builder to have that? Is that the driving force? That's what it is. I mean,
well, you've answered the question. I'll give you. I'm sure it will be more, certainly more desirable for developers to deliver detached properties rather than semi-detached. When the application came first in, way before it came to committee, well, it was for detached dwelling. That's obviously where they wanted to go. As officers, we were mindful of the conservation and conservation area characteristics of the buildings where there are kind of given such a firm steer on the acceptability of this overall. If we really look at whether so
I think with what to put a slightly more positive, slightly less negative spin on it, maybe the proposal before us is to vary conditions in the previous application that has been allowed. So we are looking at that principles being gone through. Do we have any more questions or discussion? In that case, what are the recommendations to grant that permission subject to the conditions on pages 1 to 41? Could I have a proposer and a second for that? Two deputies. Yeah. I think Councillor Dixon spoke first, Councillor Dixon seconded that. In that case, can we move to the vote on this? Before we close the meeting, I'll just draw Councillor's attention to the appeal decision on page 130, which was an appeal. Our original decision was to refuse. It was appealed against. The appeal was dismissed. So that's the end of that. And again, thank you everybody for not giving me too hard a time in my first meeting of this season. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can just say thank you for the three presentations again. I thought they were really good this morning again. Really, really good. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Now sat in that chair more times than I've sat in this one. He's the pro on it.